The Dandy Dozen returns, and this time it's for Generation X. Happy hobby. Once again, this is David Gus. If you are a sports car collector and you're working on a limited budget, that's what this YouTube series is all about. That's what I talk about. And that's what this series is about. It helps people collect cards. They need to know who are the good guys to get from way back when. You don't have to get their rookie cards. You get their second year, their third year cards. You can invest in these guys. These are decent players to invest in. Now, that's what this series is all about. The Dandy Dozen, the top 12 players to collect from the vintage era. That's a video I've already done. And it's one of the most successful of the past few months. So check it out when you get a chance. And also I'm going to do a millennial one. This one's the modern one. This goes from like 1973 to 2000, 1999. The millennial one's going to go from 2000 to now. So it makes sense. Right now, though, we're talking modern. First, a disclaimer. I am not a money expert. I am not your investment advisor. Don't trust me with your money. Let's put it like that. Me not smart. I'm not responsible for your money. Okay, so here's the rules for these lists. Now, it's not just the rookie cards that are in that era. Like, in other words, just because a rookie card was from 1969, I don't have him in that list. I have more in the modern because most of his cards were in the modern era. Whereas somebody that has most of his cards in the 50s and 60s, those are going to be in the vintage. There are a couple players that jumped from the vintage into the modern because they played so long. 23 seasons these guys played. Spoiler alert, the two guys I said that weren't in that list are in this list. I said they weren't going to be in this list. They're in this list. It's a whole thing. And remember, when I say that these are collectible players, it doesn't mean just their rookie card. It means any of their early cards are really good ones to pick up. Now, my methodology for figuring out who goes in this list, it's not really arbitrary. I didn't just say, oh, I love these guys more than anything. But I basically went back through and looked at all the cards for those players to see what their base cards, if they had a graded card that was in a collector's grade, that means it's graded one number above the decade that that card came in. So if it was a 70s card, it had to be a PSA 8 or SGC 8 and the value of that card. So in other words, all those that had values around 25 bucks for a collector's grade of one of their cards, the ones that had the most cards with that value or higher are ones that made this list, essentially. One thing I want to say before we get too far is make sure you stay to the end of this video because I am going to share my Steroid Superstars. Now, it sounds a little WWE, but really what this is it's a list of great players that, well, they're not hobby favorites because of the steroid allegations. So a lot of their cards are pretty cheap, but I put this list together. I think this is an interesting list for you to consider buying cheap now because I think in 20 years it might be a different story. And a lot of these players would have made this modern list of the Dandy Dozen, but because of steroid allegations. All right, so number one on the list, Charlie Hustle. It's something ironic about the number one most collectible guy from the modern era. It's banned from baseball, yet we love him. We can't get enough of him. The steroids guys, some of those guys are banned from baseball. We don't like them at all. So I don't know. I can't tell you. But Pete Rose, the hit king, he also has the most games played by any major league player. It's interesting. Albert Pujols, who is the active leader in games played right now, he would need to play 4 more seasons just to catch Pete Rose in games played. 4,256 base hits. That's what Pete Rose has. It's going to be tough for anybody to ever break. Well, I doubt that that's going to happen at this point. Something interesting about Pete Rose's rookie card is he shares it with 3 other guys. So it's one of those rookie stars with 4 players on it. There's actually several players on this list that share their rookie card with someone else, which was a thing that came out in the modern era. And really, it's kind of annoying for us. It's nice when it's like a Paul Mallett or an Alan Trammell, and they're both on the same card. But usually it's like Pete Rose and 3 fellas. All right, so now we move from the hit king to the strikeout king, Nolan Ryan, the major league leader in strikeouts thrown. This guy, it's weird. The hobby is such a weird hobby, isn't it? I mean, this guy's never won a Cy Young award. He was around for ages, but he only made 8 All-Star games in 27 seasons. That's kind of strange, right? His career win percentage is only like 526. That's not that great. Another interesting note is not only is Nolan Ryan the career leader in strikeouts, he's also the career leader in bases on balls. He's given up the most walks. As a matter of fact, if you cut Nolan Ryan's career walks in half, he still has 400 more than second place. Nolan Ryan also has 7 career no-hitters. That's pretty amazing. But you know what? He never played for the Yankees. He never played for the Dodgers. He never played for the Cubs or the Red Sox. Like, he didn't play for a lot of the major superstar media teams. Sure, he played with the Mets and he played with the Angels, so he had LA and New York. But for some reason, he just didn't get the publicity that he would have on these other teams. Nolan Ryan did, however, beat up Robin Ventura, whose rookie cards cost a lot of collectors a lot of money, especially since he didn't really pan out. So Nolan Ryan's got that going for him. All right, we go from the most iconic post-war pitcher to the most iconic card since the 1952 Mickey Mantle, Ken Griffey Jr., 1989. He played during the steroid era, but he never got caught up in the steroid rumors. So that's a pretty big deal. He had one of the sweetest swings in baseball, and he's still a hobby favorite. Whenever you see breaks in recent years, Ken Griffey Jr. cards are always big deals when you get those, especially if they're autographed. After 52 Topps Mickey Mantle and a 1986 Fleer Michael Jordan, the 1989 Upper Deck Ken Griffey Jr. is the 3rd most iconic sports card out there. Now we move on to the captain. Now, personally, I'm a bigger fan of Derek Jeter than I am of Ken Griffey Jr. He helped lead a Yankees team that a rejuvenated dynasty to 5 World Series rings. Like, that's amazing. And he did it during the internet and social media era, as well as the steroids era. There's never really a lot of controversy going around with Derek Jeter. So the hobby loves him. Yankees fans certainly love him. In spite of that, I like him too. Johnny Bench is number 5 on this list, considered the greatest catcher in baseball history. Now, catchers really aren't that collectible in baseball. It's weird. I think part of it is because they wear a mask. Their faces really aren't seen as much as other players. They come up a little bit later than other prospects, so I think that's one of the reasons. Defense is a lot more important with catchers than hitting. So I think just in general, just catchers just don't get a fair shake in this industry. But Johnny Bench, one of the all-time best. What's interesting is he has one of those rookie cards with a guy named Ron Tompkins. Imagine he's out there telling people that if someone wanted to buy a PSA 8 of his rookie card, it would cost them over $5,000. That'd be pretty cool. Johnny Bench is a 14-time All-Star, 2-time World Series champion, and he is a 2-time MVP. Speaking of World Series champions, we get to Mr. October. Reggie Jackson hit 3 homers in a clinching game for the Yankees to win a World Series once. Got the nickname Mr. October. That's pretty good. He's also nicknamed the straw that stirs the drink. I think he gave himself that nickname. My dad was not a big fan. He's a big Yankees fan. Could not stand Reggie Jackson. Reggie did not stir my dad's drink, I'll tell you that much right now. But Reggie did win 5 World Series, 2 with the Yankees and 3 with the Oakland Athletics in the early 70s. Reggie hit 563 home runs and retired in 7th place among career home run hitters. All right, now we get to the 2 players that I said weren't going to make this list. Not only did they make the list, they're 7th and 8th on this list. Carl Yastrzemski and Brooks Robinson. First, let's talk about Yaz. He has a cool nickname, so that's pretty cool. Played 23 seasons with the Red Sox, all with the Red Sox, which is just amazing. And not one of those seasons was on a championship Red Sox team. What? How could he? Yaz was an 18-time All-Star. He was also the first American leaguer to hit 400 home runs, as well as collect 3,000 hits. Yaz won the 1967 Triple Crown, and the only player to do so since 1967, that's what, 55 years? Miguel Cabrera in 2012. 2 players in 55 years. Now on to number 8, the human vacuum cleaner at third base, Brooks Robinson. Now this is basically a vintage player. His rookie card was in 1957. How do I have him in the modern? Well, I mean, the guy played 23 seasons. What am I going to do? I mean, a lot of his cards were in the 1970s. I couldn't fit him on the vintage list, but he's got to be on a list. He's a 15-time All-Star, 16 gold gloves for this guy. I got to have him on the modern list. His 2,870 games played at third base still rank as the most games played at one position. And his middle name is Calbert. So what do you think of that? As I mentioned a few times, pitchers are not collectible. And yet, I've got one more on here. Tom Seaver. He's Nolan Ryan's teammate with the Mets back in the day. I've got him on here. He was not only a champion with the Mets, but he's also a champion with the Reds as well. And along with Sandy Koufax, Bob Gibson, and Nolan Ryan, he was one of the top 4 collectible pitchers of that post-war era. You can even throw Greg Maddux in there too. Now, I did find it interesting that in 1986, in his final season, he played with the Red Sox, who lost to the Mets, which is kind of weird. We talk about players that aren't collectible, like pitchers. Players that steal bases really aren't collectible. And yet, here I go. Rickey Henderson, the man of steel. I got to have him on here. He is definitely one of the most collectible. 130 stolen bases in one season. To put that in perspective, in 2021, Whit Merrifield led the majors with 40 stolen bases. 40! Rickey had 130. That's a record that might not ever be broken. If you know Bill James, he's a legendary statistician. Bill James, when asked, do you think Rickey Henderson is going to be a Hall of Famer? Bill James said, if you could split Rickey in two, he'd be 2 Hall of Famers. I love that quote. And Rickey was a legendary character. He always referred to himself in the third person. Rickey thinks this and Rickey thinks that. I love that. As supposedly, one of the famous stories about him was Rickey Henderson was so proud of his $1 million bonus check one year that instead of cashing it, he framed it, put it on his wall. The team accountant had to finally call him and ask him if he lost it. He said, no, it's not. It's right there. It's on my wall. I want cards with Rickey's face on them. Okay, we're down to the last 2 players on the list, 11 and 12. I'm expecting a lot of arguments over these 2 players, so bring it. Put them in the comments. I want to see them. Let me debate you. Let's go back and forth on this. Mariano Rivera, number 11. Pitchers aren't very collectible. Relief pitchers are super not collectible. However, when you're the all-time greatest at one position, you deserve a nod on this list. You deserve to be considered the one collectible guy in the hobby at that position. Mo Rivera did it for the Yankees, won 5 World Series rings with them, had Enter Sandman as his entrance song. Come on, you got to have him as a collectible player. All right, finally, 12th player on this list. This is controversial. I got to have him in there. Bo knows sports cards. Got to have Bo Jackson on the list. He's had half a career with baseball and half a career with football. Injuries kind of screwed up everything. But this guy in the 80s was as iconic an athlete as Michael Jordan. Ask anyone that was a teenager in the 80s, and they'll tell you Bo Jackson is definitely a collectible player, even though a lot of his cards came during the junk wax era, and they're not super expensive at all. These are cards you should collect because they are iconic. And Nike's Bo Knows commercials made him even more iconic and more collectible. Check out his 30 for 30 on ESPN, and you'll agree Bo Jackson is definitely somebody you should collect. I once wrote an article called The Butterfly Effect on all the different effects that Bo Jackson's decisions changed the futures of many different franchises, including my Buccaneers. The Buccaneers drafted him number 1 overall in 1986. He refused to play with them, so he went and played baseball instead. So we threw away a number 1 overall pick. That's just awesome. And then think about the Yankees. In 1982, the Yankees drafted Bo Jackson in the 2nd round. Instead, he chose to go play football at Auburn, won the Heisman Trophy, but he could have been the shortstop on the Yankees team in the mid to late 80s with Don Mattingly. You think they might have made the playoffs then? I think so too. And I couldn't put Bo Jackson on the modern NFL players list, so I had to put him on this one. There's way too many amazing NFL players from the 80s and 90s that collectors definitely are going to need to collect. So I had to move Bo, shoehorn him in onto this list. All right, so here's the list of players that didn't make it. So feel free to argue with me and holler at me in the comments. Cal Ripken Jr., he's a big deal. I get it. Mike Schmidt, another great third baseman. Greg Maddux, I mentioned him earlier. Ozzie Smith, Frank Thomas. What about Joe Morgan? Willie Stargell, those are good guys from back in the 60s. Dave Winfield. Kirby Puckett, he had a little run there. He was a pretty awesome guy. Mike Piazza, another non-collectible catcher guy. Also in the steroids era, too. All right, now we move on to the Steroids Superstars list that I promised you. Now, a lot of people balk at these players, again, because there was they either tested positive for steroids or they were connected to the Mitchell Report or something, steroid allegations, so they just didn't make the list. David Ortiz is not on the Steroid Superstars list. He's not on the modern list, but I will have him on the millennials list. So don't worry. He's not on this list. But Barry Bonds, Mark McGwire, and Sammy Sosa are certainly the three big-headed monster that leads this team. Roger Clemens also, Rafael Palmeiro, Juan Gonzalez. Finally, Alex Rodriguez. Alex Rodriguez, I could make a case for him to be in the modern list, but the fact that he's not going to be going into the Hall of Fame, at least right now, I think he could get in the veterans list. That just made me not want to put him on that top 12 list. But he is collectible. His rookie cards aren't as buried as, say, Sammy Sosa's. But I do believe his personality and the way he's out in front now with Major League Baseball, I do think he will be much more collectible in the future years. Of all the players on the list, I think Alex Rodriguez is the most collectible. All right, so that's it. The Dandy Dozen for the modern era. Now, don't forget, we got the Millennials list coming up soon. The best players from the year 2000 forward. And there's going to be an NFL and an NBA list for vintage, modern, and millennial as well. So keep your eyes peeled for that. Let me know in the comments. Yeah, I know you don't agree with my entire list, and that's fine. That's what makes collecting so much fun. Tell me in the comments below who I was right, wrong about. But whatever you do, make sure you have a happy hobby.